Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm Ant, and today I'm going to be talking to another great podcaster out there who's doing something different, something interesting, and we're just trying to get under the skin of why people get into podcasting, what they love about it, and what it's done for them. And joining me today is the very talented and very successful Suzy Buttress from the Casual Birder podcast. And as you said just before we came on air there, you said you're one of those people that put the word podcast in the podcast. Is that something that you regret?
No, I did it for a reason. When I was trying to come up with the name of my show, I knew that I wanted to say that I wasn't an expert, that I was an enthusiast, but that I take birding on my own terms, and those terms are quite lazy and casual. And I did find that back in 2014, sort of about 4 years or 3 years before I started my show, there was a Casual Birder website. So I thought if I call myself the Casual Birder podcast, then I'm not taking anyone else's property. You know, this is something different. There wasn't another Casual Birder podcast at that point. I hope there isn't now. So that's why I kept with podcast. It was only about 6 months after I started my show that I started reading people saying, oh, you shouldn't put podcast in the name of the podcast because it's a podcast. Everyone knows it's a podcast. But the kinds of people that I might be reaching, the people in my audience, weren't necessarily podcast listeners. So being able to say it's the Casual Birder podcast, straight away it gave an idea that it was something different, but it was an audio show, not just, something that they would not necessarily be familiar with.
And if people haven't figured it out already, although I'm pretty sure from the name of it, and it's one of the things I think is really good when it's kind of self-explanatory. Your podcast is all about birds and bird watching and bird song, which, when you think about it, it's the perfect medium for it. If you're going out and looking for birds and capturing bird song, what's been for you? Have there been any particular difficulties in putting this together, like in terms of trying to capture sounds, or has it
Yes.
just evolved?
So I came at this with the naivety of wanting to create the show and wanting to share my love of wild birds with everyone and to encourage others to enjoy wild birds too. And I quickly found that, well, so first of all, I didn't invest in a lot of very expensive equipment because I didn't know if I was going to enjoy podcasting. So I started off recording on my iPhone with a mic that was attached to the phone. Now, that picks up birdsong quite nicely, but it also picks up traffic noise and people chatting in the background. And what I found was that because I'm very attuned to birdsong and bird calls, I hear that and I filter out, my body filters out those other sounds. The mic isn't that forgiving. So then when I started producing my shows, I'd be really surprised that these wonderful recordings I thought I had traffic noise in them or environmental noise in them that I didn't want. Wind noise is something I found and has caused me lots of problems over the time. So I did have to learn ways around that because, in a perfect world, I would look very strange when I'm out recording, but I would have a parabolic a parabolic reflector, which is like a dish-shaped reflector.
This is one of the things that you see at the sports games, which looks like a
Yeah, you see
1960s ray gun.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the mic is in the middle. You'd have it on a boom, so it was closer to the birds, because the closer to the birds you are, the better the quality of the sound. You'd be carrying the packs, but when I'm out bird watching, I've already got a camera and binoculars and my handheld recorder. To be carrying a parabolic, it was just not going to, and especially when you're out on your own, there are concerns about being out on your own as well, that as a birder or as anyone really, you need to consider. So I didn't want to be carrying loads of equipment as well. So I had to be pragmatic about it. I had to find a practical way to gather what I wanted and present that. So I've been able to clean some of that up in post-production, but again, it's all skills I've had to learn because I'm not a sound recordist. I'm not, I wasn't a media specialist.
Sure.
So all of the things I've had to learn in order to make my show as best as I can make it. And there are challenges with that. There are, I don't always come up to the the wonderful quality that I would want to have. And anyone that's tried recording using Zoom calls will know that, things drop out and there's stutters in the voices. And, there's all sorts of technical issues that you will come across. But I hope that the content is the thing that, while I will clean up as much as I can to get the quality there, it's the content that I hope keeps people interested, keeps people entertained, and keeps them coming back.
So how do you get over that? I'm trying to think what the right phrase is here. That desire for excellence. So the way you tune into things, and I think we've probably all experienced it a little bit during lockdown. I certainly did, where, especially during that first lockdown that we had here in the UK, we had sort of 3 months where nobody was driving anywhere, and it felt like the birds had come back, but I suspect they were just always there, and we hadn't noticed them. And so I imagine that's how you hear the bird song all the time. But when you get back and you've done this recording, and maybe you've been out for hours and you've got a rare sighting of a bird, or a bird song that you wouldn't normally hear, and it's there, but the quality's not great or even bad, how do you sort of square that equation? Do you kind of throw your toys out the pram? Do you go back and sit and wait and try and get it again?
Well, of course, if it's an unusual recording or something that, is a one-off because it's a location you've been to and, you can't go back. What I've done is, where I've either... actually, there's a couple of things I've done that have cheated, but I'll come to that in a second.
Oh, okay.
But generally what I do is try and get it down to the, if it's only a very small piece, then I'll just explain, this is the piece that I was able to play, but there was not wind noise. Or what you will find in some of my earlier episodes, because I haven't gone back and re-edited them, and in a perfect world I would, but I haven't. You will find that the levels change suddenly, so it'll be background noise. Then I will have boosted the bit that I want to share, but there's a disparity between how I've boosted it. But, you can hear the bird, but it's louder. But it's not as smooth as it would be in a perfect world.
No, I mean, that's... I wouldn't say that's cheating. I'd say that's tweaking. Let
me tell you about the the cheating bit, but don't tell anyone, okay? So very occasionally, if the bird song isn't long enough, but I wanted to share the amount of song for a particular portion, say I only had 20 seconds, but I wanted it to be 30, I would copy and paste that piece, but I would always make sure that it's within the rhythm of what the bird would do. So, for example, if a bird sings on a repeated rhythm, what I might do is take a section of that rhythm and put it at the end, but in the same gap that they've been singing. So I'm not changing what a bird would sound like, I'm just perhaps extending the amount of song that I'd captured.
So almost like a DJ remix, like an extended remix of a song.
Hey, yeah, exactly.
So when you're talking about like what you needed there, I was thinking what I might have done was maybe properly cheat and take the audio from like a David Attenborough program, which had this bird on, and put that in. Have you been tempted to do that?
No, what I decided very early on, and this is why the birds covered in my show are perhaps limited by the range that I could cover. There is a website called Zenocanto, which gives where people, it's got like a Creative Commons, I think, license, but I'm not terribly sure how that works. And at the moment, I don't earn any money on my show, but if I should in the future, I didn't want to be in a position where I was using stuff that had said it's fine if it's, there's no money involved. But so basically what I've done is I've only used sound that I've recorded or that my listeners have recorded and shared with me. So luckily, I mean, I have listeners around the world, and because I mainly cover birds that are in Europe and America, or North America, I should say, I've got a certain number of recordings from my vacations and from my own travels, but I have listeners all in those places. And so if they can share me the sound of something in their backyard, yes, it might not be recorded in the way that I would record it, but it's the bird, so it's authentic. And they've shared it with me for my show. So I will only cover stuff in my show that I have the rights to, if you see what I mean, rather than pinching it from somewhere. And there's no way I would use something that was copyrighted.
Two things that you said there. First of all, something that I think a lot of people can relate to in terms of not making any money from what they're doing, but I think that's because you're exploring your passion and expressing your passion and reaching out and creating a community. And it sounds like you've really done that, because that phrase there, which you just casually dropped in once or twice, listeners all around the world, listeners all around the world. I mean, that's pretty exciting. Like, what do you remember? Like, who the first international listener was that got in touch, or the excitement of that? Well, I mean, and how long did it take to build that?
So I was very lucky at the beginning in that I myself have been a big fan of podcasts for a very long time. And I was part, and I still am, part of a listener community for a podcast network. And because I'd met a lot of the people there, I'd been to fan events as a fan when I started my show. And several of those have got their own podcasts as well, which is part of the thing that had made me realise that regular people can have a podcast. You didn't have to have a media career, which is what I thought, you had to be in the media to have a podcast.
Yes.
Once I realised that actually regular people who have 9 to 5 jobs in offices can have a podcast about something different. So I started my show, and because my friends, most of them are in California or in America, because they wanted to support, they listened to the show, shared the show, and and some of them had never thought about birds before. They kind of knew they existed, but hadn't really thought about them. And listening to my show had kind of inspired them. So they started to send in birdsong that they had heard or tell me about the birds they were seeing. And that started building up the community. And it's so my very first contributors were people that I knew, but people that I only had met a couple of times, but knew online or knew through chat rooms. Listen to me, I'm so old, chat rooms. I knew through Slack. But then gradually more and more people found it. And, now it is so humbling and so emotionally fulfilling when I get emails from people that I know nothing about. It's not like I've recognized them following me on Twitter or anything like that. Just out of the blue, people will write to me and say, I've just found your show. I'm really, really enjoying it. And, one person this week told me that I'd really been important to helping them with their mental health, which is,
Wow.
really, really, emotionally humbling and just wonderful. Yes, I feel very proud about that, but at the same time, I think I'm really so pleased that something I say, something I chat about, can be a comfort to someone. That's just wonderful. But yeah, so now I'm starting to get emails from people that I don't know telling me about how my show's affected them or what they're finding out. And the other thing that I've learned is that where I thought my show would just be for beginner bird watchers, people that are just starting out and don't really know what they're looking for, I've actually got quite a few really good experts in my audience that actually enjoy my show. And I'm still not sure what I'm giving them, but I'm obviously giving them an angle that perhaps either resonates with them because it's something that they enjoy as well, even though they're expert birders. But that part was a bit of the, getting over the kind of imposter syndrome thing about what, I know that I'm not an expert. I'm so, so glad that I called myself the casual birder, because I'm now, over the time I've been speaking to and learning about people who are really, really expert birders, and I would have felt like, what can I say that that they are going to want to listen to? But there's something I'm bringing to it that is of interest to people.
Well, I think it's all relative, really, here, because as far as I'm concerned, you are an expert. Because I know, like, literally, I go. The extent of it is there's bird song, and I might be able to figure out that's a seagull and that's a pigeon, and that's the extent that I've got. Whereas your skill, your vocabulary in this, and I'm assuming you were doing this for a long time before you even started doing the podcast.
Oh, I've been bird watching since I've been a kid. It's had various levels of intensity in my life, but pretty much all of our vacations, all of our holidays we take are. My husband's really into landscape photography, so our holidays are all about being in somewhere natural world where I can watch birds and he can take photographs. So it's all about finding those places where we both get something from it. But I've been learning that actually you only need to be a few steps beyond someone to help them start on a journey in terms of teaching people. And my show is more about, this is my experience. I would really like you to share my experience with me, and I'd love for you to go out and get your own experiences and then tell me about them if you'd like to. So that it's really like a conversation. It's like something we're all sharing in. It's not me saying, oh, this is what you do it like this. It's all about, let's discover this together and let's tell each other about it. And I have a Facebook group for the show currently, and I know lots of people are moving away from Facebook, but it is a good group, and people are very engaged on there. And I wanted to make it from a very early stage that if people wanted to share photographs, they didn't have to be an expert photographer. If it was a blurry photograph of something, as long as you can make out what the bird is, share it, because it's more about your enjoyment, your passion. And actually, that goes back to something you were saying earlier about how podcasting is the perfect medium for talking about birds. It is and it isn't, because, birds can be a variety of plumages, variety of sizes, have very different details about them, and quite a few people, and there are very expert bird photographers out there, and fantastic bird photography. And so quite a lot of people say, how on earth can you have a podcast about birds? You can't see them. So it has become about the description of what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what I'm feeling. That's and lots of conversational stuff about, especially during lockdown, about, what's going on in my garden, which is just a suburban garden with your regular English suburban birds. But I've been learning about them and watching them and seeing their behaviours and, learning so much more, and obviously finding a way to speak about them that people are not too bored by listening to.
With the subject matter that you have, it kind of terrifies me a little bit, because a lot of the podcasts I'm involved with are predictable in terms of what we're going to be talking about. So, for example, the sporting podcasts I'm involved with, we can plan ahead for that. With the there's a legal podcast I work with as well, so you can build it around court cases that are coming up, or go through a study guide of following a course of study, so you kind of get from A to B to C to D. But with your podcast, it kind of depends on what birds come into your life and where you are. And at the minute, we've not had much control of where you are, because we've not been able to go away and do trips and see all these amazing places and birds. And so you've been very much at the mercy of what's come to you, whether that's from the birds that have come to your garden or the listeners that to your show that send something into you. So there's a part of me that would be terrified in terms of going, well, what am I going to talk about next? What am I going to do next? Am I being boring because I'm just talking about the same thing? Like, how do you manage that?
So, yes, to some of those things that would worry you, yes, absolutely. But I have got a massive bank of interviews that I haven't yet released. Don't tell everyone, but I have still got about 8 or 10 interviews that I've done over the past year and a half that I haven't released. Part of that is because I had a bit of a gap in last year's production unintentionally, and we can talk about that, but that was a bit of overwhelm that I then just kept thinking I would produce but didn't say anything about it, and hoped it would go away, and hoped just in a couple of days I'll have a new episode out. And I think it went about 6 or 7 weeks before I got the next episode out, which I look back on now and I feel awful about, but luckily the audience stayed with me. But I've still got stuff that I recorded in California in 2018. My husband went away in 2018 to Scotland and brought me back some fantastic recordings. So there's that episode that I still need to put out. So I have got stuff there, and I've also got interviews with people that I want to put out. But yes, to your thing about being a bit bored or worrying about being boring, I started this lockdown that started in January this year. I started a series of audio diaries because I had started a bird journal just 3 days before lockdown started, and I thought, why not use the journal as a way to sort of say, well, this is what happened in week 1, this is what happened in week 2, because then it's kind of like it builds up. I guess what I need to do is a sort of omnibus edition where I look back at what's happened over the weeks as well, so we can see the changes, because as the season goes on, different things happen. But I've started just doing those, and I intended them to be like 5 or 10 minutes of just a quick run through about what happened in the week. And I keep finding them getting to sort of 25, 30 minutes. And actually, I feel like there's enough in them that I'm not putting it out for the sake of putting it out. There's observations and things in there that I think are interesting to people. But I'm trying to intersperse them with interviews and things so that I don't just put out audio diaries of, week 1, this is this, week 2, this is this. But I've only got up to week 5 so far, because obviously I've been trying to catch up with interviews. And then as things happen, like Big Garden Bird Watch, or, if there's been a particular week of something that I want to put out a special week, that's put me behind. But I've now got 7 weeks of audio diaries to bring out. And now I'm thinking, do I just put them out on a schedule and just hope people still want to listen? Because it's still all about what's going on in my garden. The very fact it was during lockdown is kind of neither here nor there, because I would have still been making those observations. But I do try to think carefully about what I'm saying, and not just, you might not think it from what I'm saying now, but to try to think, don't just talk for the sake of talking, but try to make sure that I'm giving some quality to people. So I try to include things about, particular things to notice about the birds, particular things to notice about the seasons changing, what behaviours you might notice. So I try to put some nuggets in there. But my worst, you saying about ideas and things, my worst problem is I keep getting so many ideas about what I want to do with my show. So my current thing is that I want to bring in 2 new series within my show. One that focuses on birders around the world, because some of my listeners, as I said, some are really expert, some are passionate for a particular type of bird, some are just starting out and are quite new to it all. And I think all of those people have got a really valuable story to tell. And I don't feel like they're being told on other shows in my niche. So I'm going to do a focus on birders sort of mini series, that every now and then there'll be an episode that's focused on a birder, and it will be that birder's story. And I think that will be interesting. I think it's interesting to me to hear from individual people, and it helps my listeners feel like they're really part of the show, because they're suddenly a star of an episode. And the other thing I want to do is, in lots of my episodes, I've talked about particular bird species, but I think I want to do a series where each episode is just about one bird, because then if people just want to find out about, I don't know, roseate spoonbills or something, they can just go to that one episode, hear the song, hear all about the bird, perhaps hear some anecdotes from people that have seen the bird regularly. And that's kind of like a capsule episode about a bird species. So honestly, I could keep going for about... Well, I could keep going, but talking about my show, obviously. But my show, I've got so much material. I could go for like 50 years, I think, with stuff in it.
Where does that drive come from? Because in the good sense, it gives you all these ideas, but then you kind of touched on it there. There's also a negative sense to it, where you feel that sense of overwhelm and the pressure to put things out. And one thing we hear time and time again, consistency with your podcast. Make sure you're putting it out. And it's the thing that there's different schools of thoughts on it, but it's one thing I can guarantee you will hear said a lot, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. People say to you, it's important to do this. And I think kind of people forget that, people have lives. People are doing this not as their primary source of income, or any source of income. It comes from a place of passion and expression. And so is it kind of burnout that you were describing there with it?
Yeah. So I started my show as a weekly show, because when I started, I had absolutely no understanding of what work would be needed to not only think of the show. Now, I write scripts for my show, so I have lots of different types of episodes, but a lot of my episodes are solo episodes. And those ones I write a script for, because while I can talk until the cows come home when there's someone there, I can't do that when I'm just doing an episode. And I've tried all the tricks of, put a stuffed toy in front of you, put a photograph on it of your best mate and pretend you're talking to them. It does not work for me. So one of the reasons for doing these audio diaries was I wanted to do something where I just spoke about my experience and I just went from my diary. So I'm not reading out, I'm looking for a prompt, and then I'm just saying, oh yeah, on that day this happened. And that is a kind of test for me to try out speaking without a script. But my solo episodes are definitely with scripts. My interviews are something totally different, and my bird walks that I do are again off the cuff and different. But I started off on a weekly show, and my first few episodes were all scripted because I hadn't yet started the bird walks. I did that I think I did it for about 9 months, and pretty much every weekend I would work on my show, and by 2 or 3 o'clock Monday morning, I would finally get the episode out ready for work on Monday morning. And, after 9 months of that, I just couldn't carry on. So I had a bit of a gap. Again, I've have a track record of not being objective about my own abilities and thinking that, okay, I've missed Monday's episode, but I'll have it out by Friday. And then, okay, so now it's Wednesday of the week after and I still haven't got it out, but it'll be out by tomorrow, so totally underestimating what I can actually manage. So I had a little bit of burnout, but I didn't want to not do my show because I love my show. My show has given me so much. So I moved to 2 weekly, bi-monthly, every 2 weeks.
I always wondered, does that mean like every 2 months
both.
or twice?
Yeah, I think it means both. So I fortnightly, every 2 weeks I started putting it out. But that only gives me 27 episodes in a year. That's nothing with all the topics that I want to cover and the things that I want to do. So I did that for a little while. And then furlough happened last March. I was on furlough. So I thought, well, I've got extra time. Let me go back now and go back to weekly. So I went back to weekly, but I think the whole pandemic thing, affected all of us, I'm sure. But I was really feeling the worry and the stress of that. And it affected everything that I was doing. And I just ended up having the overwhelm. And that's when I stopped last year for, I think it was about 7-8 weeks, something like that. But I got back onto it.
That's a relatively small amount of time. I think to come back after that, I think is incredible because I know, and if you go into any sort of podcast directory, it's littered with podcasts that just stopped and never picked up again. And and I'm guilty of it myself.
No, but the thing is, for me, the podcast it's almost like it's become my identity. I know I have a job I will be going back to. I'm on a sabbatical at the moment. I took some time off because of what pandemic had been doing and, because they were putting people on furlough, taking it off furlough, on furlough, and I didn't want that disruption. So I applied for a sabbatical. So I've actually had 6 months of unpaid leave, which I've been very fortunate to be able to take. But, not many people are able to do that.
Sure.
But of course, that does mean that I have to keep myself very focused and not think, oh, what shiny thing can I buy? Because, it's unpaid. So, but with that time, I thought, this is what I'll do. I'm going back to work in a few months' time. So I will bank so many episodes. I will get them all done and I will bank them. So when I go back to work, I'll go back. I'll be like the swan. I'll be, calm and serene. Maybe under the water, my legs are kicking away, but on the top, I'm lovely and serene because I have banked episodes. I've got something like 8 weeks before I go back to work and not one banked episode because I've been putting out weekly episodes, but also because I've been trying to hone my craft. I've been trying to hone my workflow. And so every day, my day is filled with learning about podcasting, interacting with people, keeping my own community going, getting material for my show. So there is actually, honestly, I don't know how I ever managed to find time for work, but I will have to at some point because I'll be going back. So you do have to think about how much time it takes. And yes, maybe I should lower my sights about what I want my show to be. But I love my show so much, and luckily other people like listen to it too, that I want it to be the best that I can make it. And yes, there are some shortcuts that I can take and I'm gradually learning them. And there's things that I should have done earlier on that I didn't do, that I'm trying to get into the habit of doing now, like having a proper workflow, having a checklist of all the things that I should be doing when I release an episode, for example, because I still, even now, think, I'll get the episode up, I'll put it on my website, I'll get all the social media, and then I'll realise that there's some image somewhere, some social image somewhere that I should have changed because it's still showing last week's show. And it's just those little things that you forget to go into that bit of the website to change. And that's all not my podcast. That's post-production stuff. But it's important because otherwise it gives misdirection to people. So while I'm focusing on the creation and the execution of my show, the social media side and the post-production side and making everything look pretty and ready for consumption is something I just hadn't even thought about, and I still haven't got a handle on. And can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I am so grateful to people who listen to my show the minute it's released. But also at the back of my mind, when I see that tweet that says, that was a great episode, and I'm like, it's only been out 2 hours. Couldn't you have savoured it? Couldn't you have spent a bit longer listening? Because now I've got to make the next one. And it took me ages to get this one out. And you've done it. You've listened. It's like you've made a big Christmas dinner or something, and you've taken hours and hours. And then like 20 minutes later, everyone's gone, right, what's for dessert? And you're like, save for the food.
I'm just wondering there, listening to you talking about what just comes across as pure passion. And I think that's what's driven you through. I was kind of wondering where all the drive and the ideas come through. And I think the passion has driven you through the obstacles of like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, or overcoming these problems. But also, I'm sat here wondering, right at the beginning, you said about how you'd had somebody message you and said that listening to your show had helped with their mental health. And at first I thought, oh, maybe it's just the sound of birdsong is something that they found relaxing. But actually I wonder if it's just that tuning into somebody else's passion and joy is something that gave, I mean, I'm purely speculating here, but I'm feeling very alive listening to you talk about what you do. And I as we established earlier on, I know nothing about birds.
I think definitely people have resonated with my style. I'm very conversational. I want to be very inclusive. I want everyone to feel that they can take part in this, that they can find joy. There will be those people who become more, I'm very fluffy, very positive, very wanting to find the wonderful things to enjoy and inspire. I do know that there are sides to this that need activism and that need our input. Things like, protecting bird species, protecting habitats, making the place safe for people of all flavours to enjoy and be part of. And I tackle some of those, or I speak about some of those things in my show, but on the whole, my show is about the joy of bird watching, of finding something that eases your mind, that it provides balm. And I think possibly the way that I engage with people, I am very friendly, very conversational, and I want people to feel just very calm and I want them to feel excited, but I don't really do the kind of show that is forcing them to get out there and make changes. And sometimes I think maybe I should, but one of the things I've learned is that, there are lots of shows in my niche now. There weren't as many when I started. Certainly not as many independents. There were shows that were part of the big bird organisations, but there wasn't as many independents. Now there's a lot more. And what I've realised is you need to think of them as collaborators, as part of your community, not as your rivals, because we all have a unique way of looking at things. And some of them will be much more activist, and they will really tackle the not so great elements head on. And I am so thankful to them that they raise these issues and raise the awareness. I do what I can within my show, but I also have, I really feel that I've got a brand that I want to stay within. It doesn't mean that in time I won't change, but at the moment, this is where I want to be and this is where I want my show to be. And I know that listeners will listen to multiple shows. So it's not like people only listen to my show and don't listen to anyone else's. And hopefully, what they do is they get different elements from the different shows. So they get the different nurturing from different areas. They'll get the activism from one where they'll get the real expert analysis on birds from another show. They'll get me with my comfy, let's have a cup of tea and look out the window kind of feel from my show. And that's fine because there's enough room for all of us. And often, as I say, the audience will listen to several of the shows. And I know that in my Facebook group, people in there listen to several of the shows. So it's not, in fact, some of those other shows are members of my Facebook group. So, we interact and we get on. But I would definitely urge people when they're starting out, because there are so many shows on the same topics, and you can start to feel like, well, what can my show even say to the audience that another show hasn't done? But it doesn't matter. It's you. It's your flavour. You're giving your own feel to that, and you will find audiences that resonate with that. It might take a while, but the audience is out there. And when you think about how many people listen to podcasts, but the discovery is, how you're discovered is quite hard. But once they do discover you, if you resonate with them, they will stay with you. They will listen. And it doesn't matter if there are other shows that do exactly the same topic as you, because they'll do it in a different way. And that's what you need to remember. That is one of the things that I would say most podcasters must come across this, that they suddenly feel like, what am I saying? Why would anyone ever even listen to me? Because what can I say? But you have a voice, you have something that you want to say, and there will be people out there that resonates with.
It's been amazing talking to you, and there's been a real mix of all the great things that you've come through it, but also this kind of reality of the fact that there's lots of demand on you to do that. There's lots of obstacles to overcome, like imposter syndrome. There's lots of challenges in terms of the fact that you're not the only person out there doing that, which all these things could put somebody off, from even starting. And I know for a fact that it has. But taking a step back and looking at it all, I suppose what I want to ask you is, what difference has podcasting made to your life? Has it taken over your life? Has it enhanced your life? Has it given you a burden?
Yes to all of those. I had no idea that I would ever get involved in providing entertainment of some type to people. I didn't think I had anything to give in that way. But I absolutely adored listening to podcasts. I still do. And I, maybe there's a, I always wanted to be a singer. I always wanted to be, out there performing, and just never did. And maybe this was my opportunity to do that. But, really, it has taken over my life. I do think of myself as a podcaster first and foremost, maybe to my detriment. I love my show so much. I love the possibilities with my show. But the biggest thing that I didn't ever think would happen, and that wasn't why I started it at all, is the connections I've made with people. I've made real friends around the world through the podcasting. Now, whether that's with other podcasters because we understand what we're doing, we've supported each other. I've got wonderful friends in the podcasting world, but also amongst people who started off as listeners and have become friends now, who enjoy what I do, who are part of what I do, and then, to have total strangers who enjoy what I do and tell me, maybe it's all about ego. Maybe that's it. I'm putting my voice out there and I'm getting feedback from people telling me they're enjoying listening to my voice. Well, what could be better than that? And I'm sharing the love of birds. But I wouldn't have started podcasting purely for ego. The reason I started my show was because I wanted to share birds. I wanted people to notice the birds around them, and I wanted to find out more about birds and have the reason to go and talk to experts. which I wouldn't have done otherwise.
Well, share
So,
it now. So if people want to come and follow you on social media and listen to the show, where do they go?
well, I'm available everywhere because you have to be as a podcaster. So it's the Casual Birder podcast. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, at Casual Birder Pod on Twitter, at Casual Birder Podcast on Instagram. And if you go to my website, casualbirder.com, you can find the occasional blog, but you can find all my episodes, the show notes, and photographs that I've taken of the birds as well.
Wonderful. That's always one of the little annoying catches that you find when you've got your show name and you put it out and you come to the social media, and it's really difficult to get the same handle on Twitter and on Instagram.
Yeah.
Suzy, thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us about what you do. And obviously you've inspired people before to go and make podcasts, and if this conversation has inspired you as well, we have a little downloadable sheet with some ideas for equipment to get you started on what you're going to do. And also there's more exciting things coming from myself and Amy in the next couple of weeks. But thank you so much again for your time, and good luck with the future of the show.
Thank you very much.